Well, the reality is that nuclear is the biggest threat to renewable energy, right? And the Energy Minister for Queensland basically admitted that last year. I think it was the Smart Energy Council. He was speaking at one of their conferences, and he literally said that, a nuclear industry would be a moratorium on your industry, the renewable industry. And so by releasing this policy, I think the government's been somewhat wedged on all of this. But it surprised me just how much they have bought into that wedging and tried to turn it around and use it as an argument against the opposition. I mean, look, it's the first piece of real energy policy, different energy policy that's been put on the table for a very long time. Australians are supportive of nuclear energy. It seems very strange that they would bank so heavily on this when people know the numbers that they see on the front of their power bills.
Yeah, and just from a Queenslander's perspective, it really worries me about the path that the state government's going down in terms of an 85% renewables grid in Queensland. And when you understand in Queensland, there's a dividend of close to $1.8 billion goes back to the Queensland taxpayer every year from the generation and distribution of power in Queensland. If you take away those coal-fired power assets and you're handing them over to multinationals from another country, where does that dividend come from? There will be no dividend. And so the Queensland government needs to explain, if they're going to transition away from coal, what assets they'll own that'll go to that dividend that pays for hospitals and doctors and teachers and policemen. But this is where we've got to understand that we are going down a pathway that will not support our economy to be able to be sustainable. And you need to have that sustainable energy to have baseload power to keep manufacturing going. You can't keep subsidising our economy to keep it going in the manufacturing sector. Ultimately, your money runs out. So what you've got to do is fix the fundamentals, which is spreading our mix across energy, fixing IR, and just getting the hell out of people's lives as quickly as we can, because governments don't create jobs. The only jobs we create, you pay for. And there's 36,000 of them in this year's budget that are coming to Canberra at the cost of $24 billion. The jobs that are created in this country are from business. The people have the sweat and courage of their own conviction, their own courage to go out and spend their own money and their own sweat to create the jobs. And if we create that environment to get out of their lives, then our economy grows, people have jobs, and we leave a legacy as governments. It's not rocket science, but this is where the ideology is getting mixed up with the practical reality of how you get this country moving.
When are we actually going to get these costings? Because, I mean, you look at the reaction of the government over the last few days, it's all been basically about the costings. Surely releasing those numbers as soon as possible puts a bullet in the one argument that the government currently has.
Well, it's also been about the puerile argument they've run about three-eyed fish when any responsible government, particularly a Prime Minister, should not be engaging that when we're about to put our Australian submariners, we're going to sleep them next to this technology every night. They're at sea in one of our nuclear subs. Is that really the responsible action of a Prime Minister? If that's the extent of debate that he can contribute to and the way that he can contribute to, then there's an intellectual flaw there. But in terms of the costings, we'll be very upfront. But we wanted to give respect to those communities, and we wanted to make sure that there wasn't a scare campaign run across this country, that there'd be a nuclear power site at every town. What we've done is made sure that we're working methodically through this, and we will. We'll be very clear about what those costings are, as well as what our total energy mix will be, so that we can demonstrate clearly there is an alternative to the Australian people. And we've been very clear about that, and that'll come very soon. But we're just making sure that we're working with respect to those communities that we've announced. And I think some of that polling is demonstrating that there's a lot more comfort than what we'd even anticipated. And so that will give us comfort to move to the next phase.
How about Matt Keane, of course, the former New South Wales Treasurer, a New South Wales Liberal Treasurer, who said last week that he was resigning to go and join the private sector, and he turns up today being appointed the chair of the Federal Climate Change Authority by the Prime Minister. Did this come as a surprise to you, or was it a bit of an open secret?
Well, it was a surprise to me, but not a surprise in terms of what was announced. I mean, this is nothing more than a political stunt. It actually diminishes the standing of this institution by a Prime Minister who's trying to politicise it through appointing someone that has a very narrow ideological view about the reality of what Australians and those former in New South Wales, where he represented, people are feeling in their energy bills every month, and not coming to it with the technology agnostic approach that you would expect someone to come to this authority to give advice to the government to have. And so, you can see it for what it is. Matt Keane was obviously given a very clear direction at the last New South Wales election, and if Anthony Albanese wants to follow down that pathway, then he can do that as much as he likes as far as we're concerned. But Peter Dutton and myself are not for turning. We've made a strong commitment around strong leadership of directing this country's energy grid away from an all renewables approach into one that spreads our risk, that gives us opportunity to keep manufacturing going in this country without the ideology of tearing up your future and regional Australia's future.
Look, you might not be for turning, but I'm not sure you and Dutton have quite the same great hair that Margaret Thatcher did. Just very quickly before we go, David.
I'm giving it a go.
Well, Peter Dutton certainly won't be able to give it a go.
I got more than Dutton, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
You've got something on him. But just very quickly before we go, Victorians, we know that there's likelihoods of gas shortages coming up this summer that had already been laid out by the AEMO. And we found out today that Victoria's main gas storage plant is set to run out by the end of winter. And you've got the biggest manufacturers in the country warning that they'll close factories if supplies remain short. We've only got 20 seconds, but what a pickle we are in, David.
Well, it's about supply, and as someone who represents where all the gas is generated onshore in the Strat Basin, we've had projects stop because of lack of confidence in what the Albanese government's put in place. One alone was worth $1 billion, was going to put 120 petajoules into, and would have already been there if Albanese had approved it 2 years ago. That's 10% of the East Coast market, but we're all going to suffer because of an ideology not meeting the practical reality, not just your wallets, but also the lived experience of business and households of being able to keep warm and keep businesses going.
David Littleproud, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me, mate.